Welcome once again to another episode of SLMA Radio, brought to you on behalf of the thousands and thousands of members of the Sales Lead Management Association. If it has to do with sales lead management or sales lead marketing, it probably starts here with the SLMA Radio Show. Today we're welcoming Mark Godley, our host for the Data Dump radio program. It's a show where you can hear top B2B data vendors and buyers discuss the reality of today's data landscape. Mark will help you navigate your busy buying decisions and enjoy a laugh along the way. Data Dump is sponsored by Lead Genius. So welcome, if you will, Mark Godley. Hey, Mark.
Thank you, Paul. Paul is our announcer today on the Data Dump Show. Lars and Karan, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be talking to you again. I'm excited to have my partner, Karan Singh, on the line.
Yeah, Mark, very happy to be on. Thanks for having us.
I'm honored to have both of you. You know, we titled this show, Two Old Dogs and a Young Pup. The old dogs are Lars and I, and Karan is the young guy. Lars and I have been in the B2B space for a number of decades. We won't list how many. And Karan is a decade or so in. But I think that should lead to an interesting conversation, talking about data, sales ops, and how to build an effective go-to-market strategy. Let's start out with a couple things I just mentioned. I'm going to cue it up for Karan here for a minute, which is to build an effective go-to-market strategy. I really see three pillars, and there might be a fourth or fifth. Feel free to riff on that. But whenever I look at companies or am a part of one, I'm always looking at a data strategy. I'm looking at a software strategy, and then looking at process on top of both of those two. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in some of the companies you've worked or some of the companies you've consulted with along these lines?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mark. So I'll start by saying I think process and software are absolutely instrumental when you're executing on a go-to-market strategy. And certainly we saw that at my last company, Cloudera, where I was running both strategy and analytics. But even more so, and maybe I'm a little biased, but I'm a big believer that data informs strategy. Data informs how to define the right process. Data informs what's the right software stack to put in place to go optimize that go-to-market strategy. So I'm a big believer in that being kind of the very core tenet of rolling out your go-to-market strategy. I'll give you an example. Again, when I was at Cloudera, you know, when we first started there, and I was there maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when we first started, a little bit of a smaller company, not a lot of data available to us, right? So it was a lot of speculation about who are the right customers to go after, how do we go after them, what's the right sales model, coverage model, all the elements of that go-to-market strategy. While that worked directionally, and I think that was a good start for us, very quickly we realized that it's a journey to build out your go-to-market strategy, right? Every year you have to tune, refine, redefine so that it's even more optimized, a little bit more clear, and that it's reflective of the market. That's where data was such an important element. We started capturing extensive amounts of internal data about not just how our customers buy, but how we sell and where we're most effective. Using that drove, I'd say, 90% of the refinement that we did to our go-to-market strategy for multiple years forward. How did we redefine our target market? How did we get a little bit more crisp and clear about, you know, what the right personas are, what the right sales model for us internally is, how many people do we need in terms of headcount, all those different things really drove through the data that we were capturing internally. So I think all three are relevant. Data is kind of at the very underpinning of it all.
I would tend to agree with that. Lars, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I would say that we were lucky at Cloudera. I mean, Cloudera is a big data provider. We had access to unbelievable amounts of data that was able to be shepherded into large data stores. We had access to a data science team. These are all assets that allowed Karan and his strategy team to crunch that data to come up with these insights. So again, huge asset in being in a big data company to begin with and being able to use a data science team and then tease out all of those insights that drove a lot of the decision. And that's kind of, I think, where you have to start making sure that you have access to it.
I also think listening to Karan talk, it does remind me of the intergenerational differences a little bit. Karan, I think it's been 10 to 15 years you've been in the sales and marketing game since graduating. For the most part, analytics and big data has been around for a good portion of that. So to you, that's kind of table stakes. You then look at the graybeards like Lars and I, and if you go back a decade or more, data was pretty sparse. I can still remember showing up on Monday mornings, almost Glenn Ross-like, the lead showing up on 3x5 cards, and where are you going to get the good lead? And what's interesting is, this leads to something I want you guys to riff on a little bit, which is years ago, data really was first-party data, which is what you collect on your customers, combined with maybe a single third-party relationship. You had a relationship with a Dun & Bradstreet of the world. You had a relationship with Jigsaw. You had a relationship with, name your vendor of choice. InfoSource comes to mind. A monolithic single vendor where you expected them to deliver everything you brought into your system related to companies and people. This, I think, has morphed into the concept of the data stack, where it's now multiple sources of information. Can you folks talk about what you've seen in some of your clients, or, not just at Cloudera, but both of you have had a very successful time at HPE as well, a globally renowned company in this regard. Can you talk about the concept of multiple data sources versus single, how you've seen that change?
Yeah, I can jump into that. For starters, when I started my career in sales operations, it wasn't in sales strategy and analytics. So it was actually more around building out systems infrastructure. And so building out that sales 2.0 tech stack, both for CRM and marketing automation. And that's where my introduction to the importance of data and metadata came about. The reason that that's relevant for the question that you mentioned is this. As I went out and built out this core architecture around sales systems for various enterprise B2B companies, I began to recognize that there's different portions within the funnel, different times within the funnel where you need different types of information, right, from curated databases. And it isn't a one-size-fits-all. It isn't there is no such thing anymore as having a CRM, having your target market in place, and just relying on one data vendor like a Dun & Bradstreet and being effective. The reality is that those singular data vendors are also not comprehensive, right? If you think about marketing automation, there's a lot of data append activities that need to happen earlier stage that need to happen almost automatically before they end up in the hands of your, say, SDR team or your sales team. Given that when these leads are in the hands of those teams, there's even more work that needs to be done more on the account side rather than the persona side. Recognizing that there's different touch points along that entire funnel process where information is needed, where curated data is needed, and it became clear that there's no specialists in one particular category or in all categories. There's specialists in different categories. So it was very much of as we're building out the infrastructure for a given organization, let's be selective about what type of data they need, and then use that to drive what the ideal database is or core text or data stack is in order to go solve for the given needs that are in place. So the two kind of reflect off of each other. And again, that's been the natural evolution I've seen in systems development, which also drives a lot of the data side.
I think that's super interesting to think about the marketing side of data needs. You talked about appending versus when something becomes an MQL, what might sales need from a data perspective as something moves throughout the funnel. I think that's spot on. Good stuff. Which does bring up a point, or a question I have for Lars. Again, going back to us being old timers, Lars, you probably remember the goldmine days and the ACT days when CRM was called SFA, right? Salesforce Automation. And now we have this tech stack, which is layers and layers deep, not just multiple data relationships, but BDR tools and sales ops tools and marketing automation and CRM. Without getting too cynical in our old age, how do you feel about the tech stack today? I'll be a little bit cynical, and maybe you could pull me back from that. Are we at peak tech stack where people are expecting another credential to solve all their problems?
Well, so I started my career after college in 1988. And when I became a marketing sales rep for Xerox Corporation, I got handed a pager, a gas card, and a pitch book where I had slicks of all of my typewriters, fax machines, and copiers. And a good day was getting out into your territory at 9 o'clock, walking up and down the street into office buildings. And that was, my version of cold calling. Fast forward maybe 10 years, 1999 is when Salesforce.com was founded. And then maybe 10 years later, the App Exchange became relevant. And so if I look back at my 30 years of selling and 25 years of operating as a sales operations professional, technology really came into the forefront, I would say, in the early 2000s, and certainly when the App Exchange came onto the scene. All of a sudden, I was able to, as a CRM or SFA administrator, customize, implement, and bring CRM to sales reps and get adoption. I don't know that was possible before with Oracle and SAP. And that's where I think the Sales 2.0 revolution began. You had all of these other technology, sales and marketing technology vendors plugging into a CRM, extending the functionality. And instead of sales reps having to plug into, sign on to 6, 7, 8 different systems, you could extend functionality to a sales rep out of one system. And now all of a sudden, you were able to capture the motions and the activities of sales reps like never before. And that began to give us insights into sales rep behaviors. Yes, there are the Hoovers of the world that allowed us to go get information, technographic, firmographic, geographic, but LinkedIn came onto the scene and then allowed us to understand out of the phone book era and begin to dive into and be able to pull personas and titles of relevant people. And that's where I think things really catapulted for the modern sales rep.
Wow, Lars, I think those kind of junctions you mentioned, App Exchange, I hadn't thought about it like that, but I think you're spot on. SalesSource, let's take a quick break, short commercial break to pay for this, and we'll come back here and keep the dialogue going. And welcome back to the Data Dump with Lars and Karan from SalesSource, talking about a little bit of history and current relevancy of the sales ops function and go-to-market strategies. Right before we went to a break, you were talking about, Lars, the fact that App Exchange and bolting software onto the CRM gave us insights into sales rep behavior like never before. And I think that is a lot of sales reps don't like that level of scrutiny, but I do think it has resulted in a fair amount of efficiency gains in the sales function that we've been able to gain in the last decade or two. Let's pivot that over to Karan talking about metrics. And there's this, with all the visualization that's available today, there's the ability to build some beautiful, beautiful dashboards. What really needs to be measured that not necessarily is going to look pretty on a wall, but it's going to allow you to drive a business?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So whenever I build out an analytics roadmap, my first question is, what are we trying to solve? Because when you think about operational reporting, the stuff that, say, your salespeople need on a day-to-day basis to manage their forecasts, their bookings, their funnel overall, I find that side of the world is, we've solved for mostly everything there, right? There's only a handful of metrics that are really necessary for a salesperson to be effective at their job. In fact, if you go over your skis a little too much on that side and you give them too much information and too many pretty charts and graphs, et cetera, you find that adoption actually drops for a given salesperson within the systems of record. So I try to be very precise about how much we ask for and how much we give with respect to data. Where I am starting to see a little bit more improvement enhancements from a KPI standpoint is more at that corporate level reporting. So i.e., how are you informing your go-to-market strategy? How are you informing the overall trends and successes of your business, as well as where the challenges are, more predictably, so that you can then drive success and drive execution at your sales, at your street level with your salespeople. So for that, Mark, for me, very simply, I don't like to look at a myriad of different metrics. The ones that have been most relevant for me are two in particular. Number one, cost of acquisition, cost of expansion, and CAC payback overall. This is probably one of the most relevant metrics that I've seen in my career, and I find that is kind of over-encompassing about and offers a variety of different ways that you can use that particular metric to inform behavior. It's essentially taking data in your systems, taking your cost stack, combining the two things together and saying, well, how much money do we need to put in to get a given customer, and how much do we need to put in to go expand that given customer? That drives a lot of behaviors within your systems and within your processes. The second one, which I find really valuable, is net expansion. When we think about most companies, they're going in and talking about, well, how many logos did you get? What's your renewal churn? What's your expansion dollars? Especially if you're a SaaS business, all those are very relevant metrics. This notion of net expansion, I find, can combine all of those things into a singular metric, right? Because net expansion considers all those different attributes. So if I think about net expansion rate and cost of acquisition, if I can drive those two metrics successfully within a company, I know whether or not we're heading in the right direction as an organization. Certainly that worked very well for us at Cloudera. Those were the two metrics we frankly used as anchor points when we were filing our S1, going public. It's the same metrics that I use to drive the success and health of a business when I'm going through consulting engagements as well. So in a nutshell, for me, it's about simplicity, about not over-inundating and paralyzing people with too much data. It's about finding the right KPIs and really, double clicking on them, getting as deep and granular as you can with those metrics specifically, and seeing if they can drive the success of the business.
Yeah, that CAC is a scary thing to calc for the first time. I agree.
And I'll say, one of the things that I've noticed about CAC in particular, you voiced and echoed that concept. A lot of companies don't think about it early. When you're an early stage company, you're Series A, B, really it's a land grab. You're trying to go get some logos. You're trying to build some revenue initially, which I think, certainly is fair and is a good initial approach. But again, if you don't think about how much it costs for you to go get a given customer, go expand a given customer, you can very quickly, A, run out of money, B, not recognize that the markets that you were going after weren't the right markets. It can be very disruptive if you don't get in front of that early. While it may not drive all of your decisions early stages as a company, it is certainly something to be mindful of because it is one of those most predictive metrics.
I just want to tease out one point that was very insightful for me. And then, Lars, I want to change topics here in a minute and throw something at you. But you talked about analytics and dashboarding and reporting and metrics through the lens of, for the individual contributor, the sales rep versus management. And you talked about, when you started, focusing on metrics that were for sales reps. I often end up looking at metrics that are management oriented. So that got me thinking about how should we be helping sales reps, because my second point is there's two different kinds of metrics. There's inspection level metrics, and then there's enablement. And you really talked about something that I don't spend a lot of time on and I need to check myself on, which is enabling the first line reps as opposed to inspecting and then focusing just on aggregate management level. So I really love those insights. Thank you for that. Lars, I'm going to change it up. Let's talk about data vendors for a minute. We don't have to call out any names, but how are data vendors hurting themselves with prospective buyers? I mean, you were one of the most sought after customers for a number of years before you started running SalesSource. So what do you laugh about now or shake your head at that data vendors would do that just, were shooting themselves in the foot?
So, yeah, I've been pitched a lot, not only as a consumer of technology, but with my affiliation with True Ventures, I also am pitched early stage entrepreneur founders with new sales and marketing 3.0 technologies. And the part that always gets me is how similar they all sound, right? They're all in the sales efficiency, sales effectiveness, or marketing efficiency world. They're all using the same words. They're all talking, it seems to me, about the exact same thing. And I can't differentiate from their pitches exactly what they're trying to sell me over and above what I already have. I think there's some new categories of vendors, right, in the voice category, and the data vendors, a lot of vendors talking about machine learning, a lot of vendors talking about artificial intelligence, and it gets really cloudy because I'm not exactly sure what they mean, and they're not able to tell me exactly what it is.
I don't think they're sure either, Lars. That's part of the problem.
And there's just so many of them. It's interesting. I was reading a post by Morgan Ingram this morning, and he works with John Barrows, and he was talking about what he sees as coming down the pike, and now with, I forget what they call it, but it's it's what Alexa is doing. It's the voice automation and technology coming from intelligent voice applications. And I really do think that that is going to start to become more and more a part of not only our personal lives, which it has, but become part of our business lives. I think that's going to help save time. And that's really where all this leads to is, can we save time?
The prior point you made also resonated with me, which is all the vendors sound alike. And I think that's a good cautionary tale for the marketing folks who always want to talk about the why and the impact, as opposed to, can you just tell me what the hell you do, so you can start putting people in boxes. But you're talking about voice, Lars, I think we need to wrap up. It's a good segue to our final question. I'll start with Karan here, which is, what do you think the next hot MarTech, sales tech, ad tech vendor or space or area that you're excited about? Let's cut through the jargon. Like, what do you think is going to change the go-to-market world in the next 24 months? 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, I think good question. So for me, it's pretty straightforward. A lot of sales efficiency tools out there right now are more about execution. So how do you make your salespeople as effective as possible in prosecuting leads, converting leads, things like that? I think very little emphasis and energy has been put on seeing how we can further support go-to-market strategy planning on the front end of the second equation. Again, with the advent of machine learning, advanced analytics, I think sales and sales operations is starting to become a data science problem. And I would not be surprised if in the next few years, next year or so, whatever, you start to see more and more companies pop up in that space, being more predictive and informative and data-driven about how you can define your overall go-to-market strategy versus just on the execution side, which is, I think, a pretty saturated space.
I would agree. I would also add that I think that what we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years with the advent of account-based marketing, account-based selling, personalization is winning. And not just personalization at the company level, but it's personalization at the use case technology. And now more than ever, it's personalization at the persona level. So if you are a data provider or you're one of these AI, ML, providers of insights into the company, into company-specific problems being solved, but more importantly, the individuals that you're trying to reach out to. What are those technologies that can automatically personalize your content, your messages out to those people that work at those companies that are solving the problems potentially with your technology? That is where I think we save a lot of time.
Fellas, I wish we had more time. I can see why both of you are being so successful with your consultants. Absolutely fantastic insights. How can folks, if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way, Karan and Lars, for them to reach out?
It's SalesSource.com.
Lars, Karan, thanks so much for joining. Paul, I'm going to send it back to you.
You've been listening to another episode of SLMA Radio with our show Data Dump Radio. one of the ever-evolving shows on the Funnel Radio Network for at-work listeners like you.